Hi, I'm Jeff Schott, the founder of Revive Family and One Rule Home, and the author of the One Rule Home, which is kind of what I want to talk to you about today. The reality is, I did research with 3,000 kids, and there was one day that stands out in the research more than any other. And it was the day I had Lindsay and Sarah on camera back to back. And what made that day so unique is they'd both grown up in the same home, or sorry, the same town, the same Christian schools and the same church their whole life. They had had identical inputs. It was like a mini longitudinal study in this one place. And it was awesome because you can't find that. And so I get Lindsay on camera, and she was amazing. She blew me away. She's one of the sharpest students I talked to of the 3,000 students in the research. Still to this day, one of the sharpest, if not the sharpest student I've talked to. She knew where she was going. She had goals. She she had, I mean, she was just put together, and I was amazed by her. And she got off camera, and because Lindsay had had the same inputs, I assumed she would be just as put together. So she comes in and gets mic'd up on the camera and the lights, and it sits down, and I don't do the normal warm up questions, and I just said, "So where are you going to college?" And she starts stammering and stuttering. I don't know if I can handle college right now. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like, I literally realized I'd stuck my foot in my mouth by not doing the warm-up questions. I slipped my loafer off my foot and I put it up in my mouth and I bit it. And I tasted it. I said, I stuck my foot in my mouth on that one, didn't I? And it made her laugh and took the tension out of the room. And I put the loafer back on. I said, so what's going on? And she starts to try and tell me, but she can't. And she shuts down. And I said, let me guess. There's a lot of stuff going on in your life that your parents don't know about, that your school doesn't know about, that your church doesn't know about. And she's like, how'd you know? She looked at me like I was omniscient and I knew everything. And I'm like, well, it's the research. And I've already discovered that, 70 to 90% of kids are leading dual lives their parents don't know about. And she's like, oh, so I said, so please share because I've done the research. I've heard all these stories already. And she starts to try and share again. And she goes, well, my parents really love me, but they're really controlling and they don't let me do anything. And she shut down again. I said, would it help if I turned off the lights and the camera and got those guys out of the room? And she goes, yeah, that would help a lot. And so we turned everything off. And she said, my parents are really controlling. They don't let me do anything. I got around my parents' rules and restrictions by working with my friends. And I got to the parties. I've been drinking. I've done drugs. I've had sex. I've been hurt. And I'm feeling so guilty. I'm cutting. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Probably college right now isn't a good idea. And then things got disturbing because I begged her. I said, I will go with you to your parents. I will serve as a buffer to protect you, but you need to share this with them. And she was so scared of their reaction, their consequences. She said, if they find out I'll never have a social life again, I won't be able to talk to anybody. She wouldn't go with me to tell her parents. So then I tried to get her to share it with a school counselor, a teacher she's known for 4 years at her high school. And again, she's like, at my school, um, if they found out what I'd done, I literally would be kicked out and not allowed to graduate. So I'm not telling anybody there. And then I'm like, well, how about your youth pastor? Oh, no. He would tell my parents it would leak. Everybody would find out I'd be the black sheep in the church. So there's no way I'm telling anybody in my youth group. And I went back to her parents and tried to convince her again. And the sad, heartbreaking piece of that was she walked out of that room broken and alone. And there was nothing I could do to help her. And she was trapped. And it struck me as so wrong. I'm like, oh my gosh, all this stuff that I believed was right, the rules at the school and um, the way the parents handle failure and all of it, I thought it was right. And in that moment, it became crystal clear how wrong and destructive it was. And so I'm like, wow, if I'm honest, I sound a fair amount like her parents. And I want to raise a Lindsay, not a Sarah. And so I went and got Sarah, and luckily she hadn't left. And I put her back on camera. And I said, tell me about your relationship with your parents. And she's like, my parents are awesome. How often do you think I heard that from a high school senior in the research? Yeah, not very often. And I said, what do you mean? Well, we talk about everything. I share everything with them. They trust me. They believe in me. I'm like, well, give me an example. They let me go to the football games by myself. They let me go to the parties. In the back of my head as a parent, there's yellow lights going off. I'm like, this sounds idiotic. I said, what do you mean they go to the parties? These are what? These are chaperone parties. Oh no. Uh, Christian school parties can get pretty bad. And I'm like, is there alcohol at these parties? And she's like, oh yeah, and worse and worse. And I'm like, okay. And you go to these parties? Yeah. And I'm like, so do you drink? She goes, no. Have you done drugs? No. Have you had sex? No. And I'm like, my brain is kind of falling on the floor as a parent at this point. I literally said that. I'm like, my brain is falling on the floor at this moment. And she looks at me and kind of chuckles. And I said, so I get closer to her like this, and I go, "Are you a virgin?" And she looks me dead in the eyes, and she doesn't look away, and she doesn't deflect at all, and she goes, "Yeah, I'm a virgin." I'm like, "Crap, she is a virgin." And now my brain's really, like on the floor, and I'm like, I literally said to her on the camera, "I'm really struggling as a parent right now," and I said, "So why didn't you?" Drink and do drugs when you went to the parties. Well, I went with my parents' permission. All the other kids are there, and I don't know how they get there around all the rules and controls and cell phone stuff that the parents do, but they do. And she goes, you know, they get there beating their parents' perceived depression, so they feel like they have to dive in. And she kind of says something, I think this is almost a direct quote. It's kind of like this. Uh, these kids feel like because our parents won't let us do these things, whenever our parents aren't around, we feel like we have to do them. Well, that wasn't the case with me. So when I went to the party, my parents drove me and dropped me off. And I walked in and I saw it for what it was. And I knew I could have fun without doing that stuff because I wasn't escaping pain with my parents. And so I had a lot of fun. They get really silly and goofy when they do the drugs and drink, but I didn't need that to have fun. And I didn't, and I wanted to keep my parents' trust because we're so close and we talk about everything. And afterwards, I went home and tell them everything that's going on in the party. So they're the only parents that know the true dual life that's going on inside this community, inside this high school. And through their eyes, they had so much more power and so much more influence than all these other parents who were doing traditional parenting. And so I take those videos back and I show them to my team who all have kids, and their brains are all on the floor. And that began the pivot of diving into parenting and trying to figure out how to do it differently. And as we did more research, I took some of the videos home to my own kids um, and to my really hard daughter who would blame the sun, the dog, the wind, the moon, and never admit she was wrong. And I said, do you see me the way these kids see their parents? And she's like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, wow, that was when I was convicted that the way I was leading, the way I was approaching their failure was wrong. Um, and, for me, since I am in the faith based community, I was convicted that I looked nothing like Jesus to my own kids. And that was not fun. And at first, I wanted to feel guilty and all that. And then I realized I was just doing what I was trained to do. I was just doing what my parents did. I was just doing what the experts, the psychological parenting experts told me to do. Then you go look at a psychology degree and you look at there's like nothing on parenting in their degree. And there might be one class on adolescent development. And you wonder how did they become parenting experts? Why are we listening to them? I actually went and did research with 3,000 kids and had to change everything in my own home. And so my daughter's a mess. She's lying, she's hiding things, she's defensive, she's hard. We're having to argue for an hour and a half to get her to admit she was wrong. At that point, we were spanking and it was a mess. And I start changing what I'm doing. Um, I start operating under the one rule. and understanding what it means and how it applies in relationships and in daily life. And that one rule is love. And I was shocked at how fast my daughter's guard came down. Probably by the time I was really starting to make significant changes, she was already 10 and a half, almost 11, because the research took time and it took time for me to go, oh my gosh, if I do this, my kids will go crazy. I had all the same fears every parent does with our stuff. I was like, if I let off this control and these consequences, she'll go crazy. Um, and and so it took a while for me to step into it, especially with her. And but I did, and it was really amazing. So I'm in seminary at that point in time, and I get assigned to do my first sermon. And it's in a church of 2,000, not a church of 200. And I'm like, oh my gosh, everything starts and ends on time. And I mean, talk about pressure and stress. And it's the night before the sermon. It is Saturday night, or no, Sunday. Yeah, Saturday night. Saturday night. It's Saturday night. And I'm in the living room with the projector out, projecting against the wall, the slides I'm using, and I've got a timer and I'm trying to get it in on time, and it's too long and it's too short and it's too long, and I am stressed out of my mind. First sermon, 2,000 people, gotta be kidding me. This is nuts. And this huge ruckus breaks out right above me in the second floor of the house. And there's kids are screaming at each other and there's crying. And I'm like, everything in me just wants to say, shut up, yell, shut up. And then God tapped me on the shoulder and said, you're speaking on shepherding kids tomorrow. That I walk into the bathroom where they're screaming at each other, and Paul's got soap in his eyes and water, and there's water all over the counter and down the front and on the floor, and the girls are screaming at him and he's screaming at them. And I get the soap out of his, I don't say a word. I just get the soap out of his eyes, and because I'm not saying a word, I start cleaning up the counter. They go deathly silent. I clean up the front of the cabinet, I get a different towel and I clean up the floor, fold that up and hang it back up, and turn and walk out. Head back downstairs, and I'm resetting everything to run it through the sermon again. And it's just like stressed out of my mind. And my 12-year-old, who could not admit she was wrong, was hiding everything from me, comes down the stairs and says, Dad, I think I set a bad example for Paul. Literally, my mouth, like, I think, fell open. And I said, really, let's sit down. We sat down on the sofa, and I shut off the projector yet again. And I said, what happened? And she goes, well, we were washing our horses and we didn't use soap, still afraid of the old parent. And then, we finished, and then Paul wanted to wash his horses, and we left, and then he started washing his horses, and then we came in and we saw the huge mess he was making, and that's what led to everything. And I'm like, wow, Heather, I don't think you did anything wrong. She goes, really? I said, no. In fact, you could help me out. And she goes, what? How? I'm like, well, the next time he wants to wash his horses, could you show him how to do it without the soap, without making that huge mess? And she goes, really? And I'm like, yeah, that would be a huge help. And she's like, she's feeling really good. And I said, yeah, there's maybe one other thing to think about. I think you reacted to Paul and what he was doing supposedly wrong, in the way we used to react to you. And she's like, she got this kind of, oh yeah, look. And I said, how did that make you feel? And she goes, I didn't like it. It didn't feel good. I'm like, so how do you think Paul's feeling? And you may just want to think about, you notice that we've changed and we're not doing that anymore. And so you may want to think about making the same change with your siblings. And she goes, yeah, that's a good idea. And she goes upstairs and apologizes to Paul. And I had to rewrite the opening of my sermon because I started with that story. And after each service that next day, I had 35 people waiting to talk to me after each service. Why was my daughter willing to come down the stairs and to walk in the light? To say, Dad, I think I set a bad example. It's because we became a safe place for our kids. Our kids are imperfect, so are we. And for some reason, we feel like every time they're imperfect, we need to come down on them. But I can tell you, if like I've had a micromanaging boss that was really rough and harsh, and Every time there was a little mistake, they were coming down your throat. And I was unmotivated. I didn't want to listen to them. I was way more likely to try and break the rules under that management style. I've worked with other people that were very different, and I was loyal and I worked harder and put in more hours. And so, becoming a safe place for our kids, um, being a place where they can walk in the light with us so they can tell us the truth, tell us about their failures, and we can help them with them instead of them hiding them from us and leading a dual life. We have so much more access. And what we're talking about is proactive parenting instead of reactive parenting. I don't know why we've been trained into such a reactive thought process for parenting. Wait for something to go wrong, hammer it. Wait for something wrong, hammer it. That's not teaching. That's not training. That's not upbringing. That's not discipleship. It's none of those things. We've been led to believe it works, but my research shows it doesn't. Why does it work? Why does the one rule home work? It works because we're being proactive. We're teaching and training. Our kids will open up with us. We can help them figure out what's going on underneath the bad behavior. Because what we've been trained to do is focus on the green part of the weed, the part we can see. Well, just stop and think for a second. Every time you cut off the top of the weed, what happens? It grows back. You know what else happens? The root system doubles in size every single time because it needs to get nutrients to produce leaves to get photosynthesis going again. And we found in the research it was the same thing. I'm talking to the kids. We come along and whack the bad behavior, and the stuff that was causing it doubles in size. And so what we found is underneath all the bad behavior, all the reactions were emotions that were tangled up that they didn't understand. Often we're unconscious because only 5% of thoughts and emotions are conscious, 95% are unconscious. So if you're whacking away at your kid over and over and the same thing keeps happening, odds are they don't even understand it. And odds are what we found in the research, they tried to change for a season. They failed. They started to believe there's something wrong with them. They got more negative about themselves, which made them more sensitive and more reactive. And it led to this bad spiral with the parents, and it's actually crushing the kids internally. And what we found is what we need to do is help them understand what's going on emotionally. And we just had a mom in our Leading with Love cohort share a beautiful story. She's only into week 6, and she's already seeing changes with her teen who's got major anger issues. And she told this story, and she was brushing her daughter's hair, and the comb caught, and it hurt a lot, and her it triggered her 14-year-old, and she just went off. And instead of the mom saying, "That's it, I'm not going to brush your hair," or issuing a consequence, she's like, used her name and said, "I know this isn't you. This isn't who you are. What's going on? What's going on in there?" And the girl exploded at that, stormed into her room. So she went out and just waited. And eventually the daughter came out and said, "Mom, will you come in and talk?" She came in, and Mom reiterated, "I know what happened isn't you. You've got a good heart. So what's going on?" And she sat down and, "Mom, my 2 friends at school, they cut me out of a text chain, created their own, and they planned to dress alike that day, and they left me completely out. And I feel so alone." And she breaks down crying, sobbing, deep grieving tears in her mom's arms. And you know what? That mom felt really successful because she was able to help her and look and talk about friends and deal with what was really going on. Behavior was just the green part of the weed. The cause was the roots. And so, does this work? Yeah, it definitely works. Is it way more fun? Yes. Is it as easy as rules and consequences? No, I think it's the laziest form of parenting because we don't have to think, we don't have to do, we don't have to train, we don't have to teach. We just wait for them to do something wrong and issue a consequence. Um, so is this a little more work? Yeah, but is it so much more rewarding? And do your kids end up wanting to follow you? And do they end up listening and involving you in their lives? And do they stay close to you through the teenage years? Yeah, mine did. All of them. And none of them went off the deep end. Not a single one of 4. In fact, I was kind of asking and pleading with them to date in their senior years, not because I had a rule you can't date, I was hoping they would because I wanted them to get out there and experience stuff, but they were so supported and felt so connected in our family. They didn't feel the need to go find a boy, my first two girls. And so, yeah, there's just a different way to do this. And it's it's way better. It brings you close. It keeps your kids close. You feel successful as a parent. The conflict, there is no reason to have conflict. Your kids want to help you. When you ask for help, they volunteer because they're feeling more loved and accepted and supported and encouraged by you than their friends, than their school, than their teachers, than social media stars, influencers. You know, for some reason, I think we've been trained to believe that if we treat our kids better than the world, there's a problem. We have to be harder on them than the world is. But what we found in the research is that just drives them away. And when we treat them better than the world, and we treat them and we handle their issues with understanding, and we help them figure out what's going on inside that's causing the things to go wrong. Um, when we handle issues in people's lives, like the way the Good Shepherd handled issues in people's lives, um, they buy us more than the world and their friends because their friends won't treat them that way. Their school won't treat them that way. The world won't treat them that way. And all of a sudden, they're listening to us and they're following us because they want to, not because they have to. And then you don't even have to fear the world anymore. It just doesn't even matter. It doesn't hold a candle to you in their lives. So, the one rule home: read the book, schedule a call, check out the Leading with Love cohort, the self guided, as well as the cohort where we actually meet with you and help you process and wrestle with what's going on with your kids every week for an hour and a half in a small group of parents. We want to help you become the primary, the only influence in your kid's life. And if you stop and look around right now, I bet you there's a lot of you who would say, I'm not sure I'm having much influence in my kid's life at all. And you're frustrated with the video games and the social media and the schools and all of those things. They're not the problem. What we've been trained to do by psychologists, that's the problem.